Good morning and welcome back to Reviving an Idler. I am adrift once again on the mighty Forth, this time in the fog. Well, we've come out on the Forth this morning just to have a little practice of our navigation. I thought I'd choose a nice foggy day to give that a whirl. It's always good to test your skills. Got the old paper charts, should have a proper hand bearing compass, but unfortunately left that at home, as you do. So we're having to use the emergency compass that lives in my PDF. It feels a little bit more escape and evasion, a little bit more fun, a bit James Bondy using that compass, which makes it a little bit more fun. Well, believe it or not, we are just off the beach in this fog. It's come down a little bit thick, so I've not managed to get any bearings right now. We have an outgoing tide just now, which is taking me back probably in the region of 100 metres or so already. I'm just watching the pots go by. And a pot, of course, being the Creel boys. So yeah, I reckon we've drifted back about 100 metres in the time that I've been making this recording. Well, I'm just going to keep on my heading of 250 degrees going that way up towards Ely, and hopefully I'll get a break in the fog and I can get a bearing on something and sort of identify where I am. I will say at this point that I know this coast very, very well. I've been up and down this coast 100,000 times, so I could probably navigate it without compass or charts very, very easily. And if worst case scenario, I can always just head due north and I'll bump into land eventually and be able to carry the boat up the beach or something. So we're not in any danger where we are. The only thing I do have to watch out for is all the Creel boats that are dashing around in the fog. So just using my ears, listening for engines, and I've got my radio on as well, just in my PDF, should anything go awry. Well, managed to score myself a little landmark for a bearing. Pretty much correlates with where I think I should be on the chart, so happy enough with that. That is Ladies' Tower off Ely, and the story goes a little something like this. There was a rich lady, a Lord S, Duchess or something like that, and she used to enjoy a morning swim in the sea. And that tower was built so that she could change in privacy. And there would be a big fire in there, so once she'd had her swim, because she would swim, all seasons, she would retire to that little building and enjoy the amazing views you get from that little corner beside the fire and warm up. Lucky her. We're still in the fog. Seals blowing off around us. You can see him, I don't know. And you might recognise this view from an earlier video. That's all been a bit of fun, so we're just going to take a bearing, basically a straight bearing between Ladies' Tower behind me and the harbour in St Moniz, and I'm just going to basically go straight back riding that bearing. I've got the tide behind me. I don't expect it's going to put me off course too much, and there's a little bit of wind coming in from the north, and I don't think we're going to get much leeway from that either. So just going to basically ride that bearing home and get back into the boat shed so we can see what we've been up to in the last couple of weeks. Well, we are back aboard Idler this morning, and just to give you a quick catch up on where we are, as you know, we have been looking at the Geralds and the plugging of the planking on the starboard and port sides. We are nearly finished on the starboard side. We've got one or two little bits to sort of dress up, bit of sanding to do, but this starboard side is almost done. Port side, we've started, we've got most of the Geralds done, most of the plugs done, still a few cosmetic plugs still to go. Jumping down here, however, as you can see, we've got the majority of the planking all plugged and relatively smooth. There's one additional plug down there that needs shaved down, but it's looking pretty good. Give it a final sanding, and I believe the starboard side is ready to receive the new rib. I did have to spend a little bit of time manufacturing a little tool to allow me to plane smooth the inside face of the planking, this concave section of the planking, and that involved using an old block plane and basically rounding off slightly the sole and the iron as well on the inside, resharpening all that and giving me the chance to use a planer to try and clean up some of this geralding. And if you do have questions or you'd like me to show you that in the future, stick it in the comments there and I'm more than happy to throw together a quick video just to sort of demonstrate how I went about doing that. And today's mission is going to revolve around cleaning up some of the cosmetic faces on the port side. Most of the plugging has been done, however areas like here we've got a little bit of damage. I'm going to have to take that and do a real Gerald over there, and equally up here there's just some cosmetic issues just on the outside, so we're going to have to sort of try and clean up some of that. Shave down these Geralds so they're nice and flush and smooth. Give both sides their final sanding, and then we can start looking at some of the details in the floor. Well, one of the most important things, as you're probably well aware now, to remember when you're working with wood is grain. Grain direction, grain direction, grain direction. So we have these Geralds sticking up, they're off the planking, they obviously need to be reduced down. There's various tools we can use to shrink that down. We can plane it, we can sand it, but the quickest method is to chisel away the heavy stuff and then do a final planing on the bottom to get it all smooth and flush. Now you may think that the easiest and fastest thing to do, or the correct thing to do, is to stick your chisel in right at the edge of the Gerald and just hack through it. Danger there, of course, is that as you drive your wedge in, which is essentially what your chisel is, it's going to grab the grain below the line of the planking and rip that out as you cut through it. So in order to mitigate that, we want to start either at one end or towards the middle and work our way back. Now, the grain direction in these Geralds is kind of stacked that way. Okay, it's effectively quarter sawn in the same way as the planking, so that as they swell and contract, hopefully the Geralds, which are made of the same pitch pine, some of the old planking that I actually took out of the boat, so they are made of exactly the same wood, hopefully they will expand and contract at the same rate as the planking, and they should therefore never open up or crack or anything. But I still want to take the precaution of doing it sensibly and slowly, and so we'll start cutting just at the side here. Effectively shave one side off, then the other side, then the middle. Starting from about the middle. and then we can reverse the process to come from the middle, going back towards that side there. Doing that basically ensures that we don't risk ripping out the grain of the gerils. Okay, yeah, so we are back aboard Idler, and it has been a fantastic last couple of weeks. Not. So we had a lot of geralding, a lot of plugging. It's been slow, it's been tedious, it's been boring, and it's only the first pair of frames. But that's now done, thankfully, and we've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more to go. Well, where we are just now, anyway, is we've got the areas of the planking all sanded and cleaned, the geralds are in and glued, the plugs are in and glued. The floor has been faired and the frames have been faired to fit as well. All that remains to be done is to drill a hole for the ballast keel bolt and 2 smaller bolts for the actual keel bolts themselves. Rivet the frame to the floor and whack in all our nails to attach the planking to the frame, and then that is this section done. However, I've decided to change my plan on how I'm going to be reframing her. More about that to come, and I'll explain my reasons why and what we're doing. But before that, I need to take the frame out of the boat and go and cut a fresh lump of oak from our stock that we can make a steamed timber from. Okay, yeah, so why on earth have I squandered my time, energy and money into making sawn frames that required templates, huge slabs of oak that I had to cut out, and lots of time fairing and cutting them by hand basically, if I'm just going to go and change my mind and go with a different technique altogether? Well, one of the things that you'll be aware of recently is the effect of Brexit and the effect of the coronavirus pandemic on the UK and our lumber supplies. It has been quite catastrophic. We are looking at round about, in places, 300% increase in the cost of materials, which is quite a substantial price hike, even for the small amateur boat builder such as myself. So I'm going to be looking at different ways of making the most of the available timber I have. And one of the ways I can see of doing that is using steamed frames. Now I have experience of steaming frames, as you've seen from earlier videos, quite extensive experience now, and I like it. I think it's a very, very, very forgiving and beautiful process. Add to that additional information such as watching Acorn to Arabella, and I'm sure many of you who are following my channel are likely to be subscribers to that channel, and if you're not, I highly recommend you check it out. The guys are doing a wonderful job of building their own boat, Arabella, and they do a fantastic piece on how they are steaming their frames for their boat. So that has helped me a lot in coming to the decision I've come to. For those eagle-eyed amongst you, you'll notice the log doesn't work. We are actually moving. We're not going fast. A knot and a half, 2 knots at best. We're at slack water just now, so we're just kind of milling about outside of the harbour. There's more wind than was forecast today, which is nice, but there's still very, very little. We're talking gusts of maybe 6, 7, possible 10 at times, but very, very little wind. So what are the main considerations I have to make whilst choosing what kind of rib to use? The first one is obviously they need to be strong. I need to be able to put them into the boat, ideally by myself or with the help of one other person. I need to be able to fit them to the boat as they are, as one, so they need to be faired to fit the planking. I can't just put the frame in and then fair them with battens or anything. I need to be able to put it straight into the boat, so it needs to be forgiving in that regard. It needs to be cost effective, and they need to be oak, and ideally they need to be aesthetically pleasing and as close to the original look of the boat as I possibly can get. We'll jump below in a second and I'll get out my good old-fashioned drawing pad and I'll show you exactly what I've come up with. I do think it's going to be a very effective way of dealing with the problem, while still retaining all the strength that the boat needs, as well as a lot of the aesthetic, as well as a couple of little things that I want to be able to look at and enjoy whilst I'm aboard Idler when she's afloat again. So I'll see you down below. Okay, so we are now all safely moored up back in harbour, and I'm going to give you a wee chat about my plan going forward. If I could just quickly show you this little sketch of Idler, sort of map of her frames if you like. You'll see every single one of them is currently a sawn frame. The one we are working on is this one right here, and that's the one that we're currently looking at just now. The one immediately next to it is going to carry a bulkhead, and the one just forward here is also going to be carrying a bulkhead. For the reasons I've already talked about out on the water there, I'm going to try and use steamed frames as much as possible. They are cheaper, faster, easier to install, and they are just as strong, if not arguably stronger, in certain applications. I have, however, already cut out 3 sawn frames, and I intend to use 2 of them still. If we go back to our sketch here, this middle one here with the futtocks, I really like the look of that, to be honest. I really think it's beautiful, and I actually want to incorporate it into the final boat, so I'm going to keep that sawn frame. I'm also likely to keep the one immediately beside the one we're working on. Okay, so this one's going to carry a bulkhead. Now, because it's carrying a bulkhead, it's going to want to have flush surfaces for the bulkhead to actually meet. And because the sawn frame has its rolling bevel cut into it, so it sits square onto the planking. So if the planking curves, the actual frame fits in there and provides a flush surface. That's going to benefit the strength of the frame, and it's also going to benefit the overall hull strength, and it's going to make it far easier to attach the bulkhead to that location. So I'm going to keep a sawn frame there. The fashion piece I'm yet to decide upon. It would be nice to keep that as solid wood, as it is solid wood, but there are some cracks in it. I'm going to have to look at that. I suspect I'm going to have to change my plan for that one slightly, perhaps go laminated. We'll talk about that in a later video. And this frame here, I'm quite possibly going to go laminated for that frame as well, for similar reasons as to this one here, because it has the bulkhead. I do want that to be flush and square so I can get a nice solid join and a solid bulkhead. That is actually underneath the mast, so I do want that to be extra strong as well. So I'm likely to go with a laminate or a sawn frame in that location. Everything else, however, I would like to go steamed with. Now, my method of steaming the frame is quite important because the frames are going to be quite thick. Ballpark 2" by 2" is kind of what I'm going for. The original frames were 2 inches wide by about 3 inches thick. So they were 3 inches that way by 2 inches that way. Okay. And I propose to copy more or less exactly the same procedure that the Acorn to Arabella team used, and that is to cut a square timber, and then saw a long flat curve through the middle of it and leave a section at the bottom intact and whole. And what that section at the bottom does is it allows me a large area of essentially sawn timber through which I can through bolt to the floors, so I don't need to change the way the floors are laid out in the boat. I can use the original floors and the original fixing method. I don't have to cast bronze frames or anything like that. I can use the original oak ones. And this kerf allows essentially 2 frames to slip past each other as you bend them, which just takes a lot of the pressure out of the oak as you bend it. Because when you bend a piece of wood, you're essentially compressing this side. Okay, that line or the grain in there is getting crushed, and this side here is getting extended. It's getting pulled apart. As it gets pulled that way, and this side gets crushed inwards. And having that kerf gives it a bit of a slip, so it allows the wood to move past each other and just allows it to bend easier. And once that's all through bolted, possibly glued, it's going to be absolutely solid. And I do think that's probably the best way we have of going forward at this point with Idler. If I could drop you down onto the chart table just now, you'll remember that Idler has sawn floors, looking a little bit like this. And there's a little orifice in there for doing nuts, etc. And her floors support her frames, which are then built over the top, something like that, and then bolted through. Now that is part of her construction. Now this point here, this aspect, is my largest concern in changing the way that she is framed. As you have a rib or a frame and you put a hole in it, the grain runs obviously along it like this. Any twisting motion or movement in the frame exerts pressure on these, and that pressure is forced along the grain. Now if I use my steamed frame idea with its kerf sawn in, you'll find that that bolt is going to sit, or that rivet is going to sit right in between the two. And I don't think that's the best way of doing things. That to me looks very weak, it looks very unprofessional, and it just doesn't look like it's going to do the job properly. So what I propose to do is to cut our kerf, but only as far as the floor, leaving the bottom half of the frame essentially solid. I can then carve and fare away at this side where it meets the planking to make it fit as you would with a sawn frame, but you're still bolting it, riveting it through the floor as she was traditionally, and that will retain the traditional aesthetic as well as the practicality of being able to use a steamed timber.
Well, this rather mental contraption is actually the best tool I have at the moment for sawing the kerf in this rib. It's another homemade goodie. I think it's actually quite good and it's doing a surprisingly good job, and it's certainly faster than using the bandsaw, which is simply not up to the task. I have ordered some new blades for the bandsaw in the hope that that might tweak it, but I just think our bandsaw is underpowered for the job. I've also spoken to a local carpentry workshop, and they do have a bandsaw and they're willing to cut a couple of kerfs into some ribs for us, so we'll pass that on to somebody else to cut the kerfs, because they do have a better tool for the job that's going to give us a much cleaner, more reliable kerf through the rib. That's going to take about a week or so for somebody to be available to do that job, which is a little too long for me to wait for this rib. I want to get this into the boat ASAP so I can see how it works and iron out any problems early before I cut the rest of the blanks. So I'm going to go ahead and saw this down using this contraption. I'll just show you around the contraption just now though. So the business end of the tool is essentially a bow saw. We have two uprights, and we have a cross piece in the middle, simply bolted to it, and then we have a bow saw blade screwed onto that. You tension it using this little rope here, and it's simply just a Spanish windlass to tighten that up to make sure it's nice and taut, because we want that to be nice and tight. I'm using the broom just to stop it falling over. And attached to the end of the bow saw is one of these exercise resistance bands, you know, just the big elastic bands essentially. And that comes back along the arm, just bolted to the workbench to this gallows type arrangement, and it's just simply clamped up there so that the band can slip down. Nothing fancy. And that allows me a pull back against the bow. So when I'm pulling the bow saw towards me, there's some resistance in the back, so that keeps the blade aligned and straight, and then when I push it back, it's going to be essentially pulled back as if there's somebody on the other end of the bow saw. You'll have seen the double-handed saws that the lumberjacks used to use in all the old cartoons. Same idea as this. We've got somebody pushing and pulling on the bandsaw. That keeps the blade straight and also stops the blade from twisting and kinking. So the cut that we're going to get with this is not going to be a perfectly clean cut. There's going to be a little bit of waving, it's going to be a little bit rougher. We do want this to be as clean as we can possibly get it, but with the tools I have, that's simply not going to be possible. So we are treating this rib almost as a tester. If it works and it's clean enough, then great, it'll go into the boat and that's all fine. If it doesn't work, we'll have learned a lot by trying it this way first, and whatever we learn from this, we will be able to take forward and put into the new frames when they're cut properly on a bandsaw by the carpentry workshop in a couple of weeks' time. So we'll keep plodding along with our new toy, see how it comes out, and hopefully we'll get it into the boat today. Well, we have managed to rough out our frame. So we are going with it's 55mm by 55mm, so it is a square lump of oak. It is perhaps a bit stronger than it needs to be for where it's going in the boat. And as we said already, it's our first attempt at kerfing a lump of oak like this, and I would be lying if I said it was perfect. I'm not entirely happy with the way it follows the line. There's a little bit of a bulge in places, and as they slide past each other they're going to cause gaps. So it's not perfect, but that is entirely down to the tools that we're using to do the job. However, if this goes into the boat alright, steams alright, fits the curves as it should, the future frames that are done this way will be getting cut, as I said, on a professional bandsaw, and they will do the job a lot nicer and a lot better. So this is going to be largely a trial piece. That said, I don't want to be wasting wood. Is one of the reasons I'm doing this technique, is to actually save on some of the wood that I've got, because I do have very good quality wood and I want to use it as best as possible. So if this does work, I am going to glue this in. The reason for using glue, I'll be using an epoxy, and that is because that will actually fill some of the gaps and we won't be left with air gaps on the inside of this frame. That's not something I want to do on all the future frames, but for this one here, because I know we will have air gaps, I am going to just fill those holes with some gap filling epoxy. As for swelling and contracting, that shouldn't be an issue, as we have a glue line and the wood can swell away from the glue line, so the actual glue line shouldn't ever be under any pressure. It's also going to be having its rivets and nails through them as well, so that's also going to hold it together. Down this end, this is perhaps my most interested part, because essentially what we have here is a sawn frame with markings for the rivets that will go onto the floor, and this allows us to attach a steamed timber directly to the frame in the old way. That means that Idle will retain a lot of her original look, and she will almost appear as if she's constructed from sawn timbers, even though we are using steamed. And another wee point before I go ahead and clean this up and steam it into the boat is that where this is going is perhaps the only place in the whole boat that I will have future access to this rib. I will be able to remove this even once the deck is on because of where it is. Okay, every other location on the boat there's going to be furniture, beams, knees, etc. in the way, so it's going to be quite difficult to get to. However, this one here is yeah, I'll be able to get to this later, so if it all goes pear-shaped, this is the best one to experiment with. Okay, yeah, so we are looking at installing this frame in the next hour or so, hopefully. It's in the steamer. We've got it nice and hot just now. It's a good temperature, and we're all prepped on the outside of the boat. We've got the screws all located. We've got chocks and blocks and all kinds of stuff to try and get this in. As you saw in the piece just before this, we did take an initial bend out the bottom of the frame, and that was because I wanted to try and bend that thick 2-inch section and try and get that started before I put it into the boat. Because when we put this down into the bottom, down by the garboard, and we start levering that big 2-inch section off the planking, it's likely to deform it quite a lot. So I thought if I can take a template and bend it round that form, that's going to take a lot of the initial pressure of the bend out of quite a vulnerable area of the boat. So we've done that. So if we have a wee peek down at this floor here, you can see I've bolted it down to the keel, so that's not going anywhere. And I've also put in this little block just in here and screwed that to the keel, and that's going to act as a little toe to catch the end of the rib in the same way as the ribs catch that little pocket. And that will help us to actually bend it round.
Evening folks, right, so we're just going to get the rib out. It's almost ready and we're going to try and install it now. So here we go, guys. Come on, Norway. Right, we're off, here we go. Ready? How do you start it?
Probably just like this.
Oh, how do you start the video?
It's recording now.
Oh, this is all outtakes then?
Outtakes. Right, well that is a fairly momentous event for us. We have finally installed the first of our frames into the boat. First of hopefully the rest of them. We'll get the rest done as soon as possible. So that calls for a little toast. And we've got some fantastic beer from our buddies down in Ovenston Brewery. Ovenston 109. Oh, good sound.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Poured badly.
Always nice to have a good beer after a hard day's work.
I'm going to enjoy this.
And to celebrate the first beam.
Well, to the first frame, my friend. Thank
Cheers.
you.
Cheers.
Bonjour.
Cheers.
And thank you very much to you guys for watching, sharing and subscribing and being part of this restoration adventure. We honestly can't thank you enough.
And hope to see you soon. Take care.
Slange.
Slange. That's good.
That is good.